We'll be joined by Adam Hancock in Singapore for China's reaction. But first, let's cross to Washington, D.C. and speak to our correspondent, Andy Rosegen. Hi there, Andy. So this incident has really escalated in the last 24 hours. We're even now getting reports of another balloon over Latin America. What else do we know at this stage?
Well, the Pentagon is just saying, Yashni, that for the moment they are detecting a Chinese spy satellite, a balloon, I should say, transiting, as they put it, over Latin America. Canadian officials are talking about the possibility of maybe a third one there, although the Pentagon has not confirmed that one. As for the one over America right now, at last check, it is kind of in the central part of the United States, right in the middle, around the state of Missouri. That's the last place that anyone really spotted it. It's dark now, obviously, here in Washington. But it's apparently this balloon, if all the weather patterns hold, it apparently is going to move off over into the Atlantic Ocean through the state of North Carolina, the last state that it would pass through before it reaches the Atlantic Ocean. You've got plenty of Republicans here, critics of the Biden administration, saying, look, just shoot it down. It's like popping a balloon. The Pentagon says it's not that simple. There's hardware on this thing that could weigh tons. A debris field could seriously damage, injure people on the ground. Also, Yashni, how embarrassing would it be if the U.S. tried to shoot it down and was not able to, and it floated out there for a while? Embarrassing and dangerous. You've got the U.S. Defense Secretary, the former Defense Secretary, saying, look, the Pentagon should find a way to contain it, bring it down safely, study it, and then even use it as a bargaining chip against the Chinese. Yashni?
And that bargaining chip may come into play because, of course, U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken now cancelling his planned trip to Beijing, and a lot of politics also coming into play with all of this. Like you said, President Biden getting a lot of flack from Republicans.
Right. And in fact, the big question here that everyone wants to know, Republicans and Democrats, is what is going on with the Chinese. They had to have known that the U.S. was going to see this thing if the Chinese did unleash this intentionally. But some military analysts say that was intentional. They wanted to look like they were just going to poke the face of America and say, see, look what we can do. We can send a Chinese spy balloon right into your backyard over your sensitive sites. A warning, perhaps, because the U.S. has recently built up its military forces in Guam and the Philippines and Japan. So this might be just part of this chess match. But, you know, as one former congressman pointed out just tonight, Yashni, they said, look, what if the Chinese put an EMP, an electromagnetic pulse, on one of these balloons that would wipe out the electronics, the electricity in a large area of the country? There's so many scary things that could happen here, and that's why this is really concerning. But, you know, all eyes around the nation right now are up in the air looking for this thing.
Up in the air, yes, quite literally. Thanks for that, Andy. We're going to go to Singapore now and speak to Adam Hancock. Hi there, Adam. So what's China saying now about these accusations from the United States? Because they first started off by being quite apologetic, which is quite rare, but now they seem to be going on the defense.
Yes, as you mentioned yesterday, when they first openly admitted that this balloon belonged to them, they were surprisingly apologetic, saying it was regrettable that it had ended up in US airspace. And usually these kind of statements from China, particularly the foreign ministry, they're very aggressive, very attacking or batting things away. But they actually said that this was a civilian aircraft used for weather purposes, and ironically had ended up over the US because it had been blown off course by the weather. But we have had more from China today, and they are changing their tone now and becoming a little bit more aggressive. They're blaming politicians and some of the media in the US for trying to use this incident to discredit China. We believe there's been a phone call between the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi and Secretary Blinken, in which China have said that they respect international law. They have again said, you know, that this was an accident. And they've stressed that this needs to be handled in a calm manner and that there should be open communication between both sides when dealing with incidents like this. So yesterday I was very surprised actually to see how apologetic they were in their statement, but it was more true to form today in terms of how China are now handling this and trying to really use it as a way of framing another US attack on China.
Where does this now all leave U.S.-China relations? Because this upcoming trip from Anthony Blinken was meant to kind of move on from that meeting that we saw last year, at the end of last year, between the Chinese and U.S. presidents in Bali. But now, as Adam was saying, everything is really or rather Andy was saying, everything is really up in the air.
Yes, it feels like one step forward, two steps back, really. We obviously had that meeting between President Xi and President Biden in Bali, and this Blinken visit was meant to be a little bit of a follow-up from that, really. There wasn't too much hope for much substance from the meeting, but it was more symbolic, really, seen as another step in the right direction after things have been so difficult for a few years. But I think what this incident shows is really how fractured relationships are. It's really on a knife edge, and the fact that this whole trip can be cancelled purely due to this incident on the eve of the trip shows how difficult things are at the moment. And the US, they've left the door open to this visit taking place again when conditions allow, is the term they use. But given the fallout from this and the renewed tensions, it's difficult to understand exactly when conditions will be right again for this visit to take place. And in this part of the world, it was understood that Beijing were really gearing up for this visit. They saw it as an important visit. You know, they're trying to portray that they are open to the world again after zero COVID. So it's very surprising the timing of this, really. And particularly this week as well, when the US, they announced increasing their military presence in this region, in the Philippines. It was seen as another important moment in the balancing act of the two sides in this part of the world. So very surprising that this incident has happened. And again, relations have soured once more.
Adam Hancock, thank you so much for that update live there from Singapore.